Hello, my name is Paul Healy and I'm the editor of the Roscommon People newspaper. I'd like to welcome Dr. Martin Daly, who's a candidate in the general election in Roscommon, Galway. Martin, you're welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Now, you're a well-known figure in the community for many years and obviously a GP in Ballygar. But just, I suppose, maybe tell us a little bit about your background, maybe.
Yeah, I was brought up in Ballygar. My parents were GPs there. I'm the son of an immigrant. My mother was Indian. She met my father in college in Dublin in the mid-50s. They worked in a number of places, but came to Ballygar in 1967. A very different Ballygar than it is today. They set up practice and home there. They had 7 children, worked very hard, gave good service to the community. But as they always said themselves, the community was very good to them and their family. And they always took that approach. It was a community-minded approach to practice in a rural area. And they were also interested in the affairs of the area. My dad was involved in sports. He was the team doctor for Galway in the 1980s.
All right.
He helped set up Craig's Rugby Club in 1975. It's their 50th anniversary.
That's right, yeah.
And I think the book launches tonight.
Yeah.
And my mother was integral to that as well. She was very involved in Craig's Rugby Club, but they were involved in GAA, rugby, racing. My dad was owned a few racehorses in his time, as multiples, as many people in the countryside do.
Yeah.
And so we had a very good life in Ballygar, and it was one of the reasons I came back. I felt part of that community, and I've been very privileged to have been able to come back to that community, have a very good career, and bring up my own family there.
And how long have you been practicing yourself?
I came back in 1994, so I'm 30 years in practice now.
Right.
And I've had 4 children.
Right.
They're all in their 20s, and I'm married to Dr. Miriam Mangan, my wife and partner, who is a GP also. And we've developed our practice on from where my parents were at. We have 6 or 7 staff, and we operate out of a HSC building in Ballygar. I believe strongly in health infrastructure in rural areas. I believe strongly in that old network of GPs up and down the country providing an even quality of service, and we are in danger of losing that.
Right.
We need to attract young health professionals, not just GPs, but allied health professionals, nursing professionals into country areas. I think if we lose that, we're going to lose the strength of the GP system.
Right, okay, well, we'll come on to those issues, Martin. Just in relation to your political ambitions, for want of another word, there has been speculation for a good few years that you might be a candidate for Fianna Fáil at some point. You're obviously affiliated to the party. So I suppose an obvious question might be, why now? Why have you decided at this point to put your name forward?
Yeah, I was always interested in politics and in Fianna Fáil politics. My father was as well before me. The first Fianna Fáil Ogra meeting I attended was in 1979. It's a long time ago now. So I had an interest as a teenager, and I had a general political interest as well as also interest in community affairs. The reason why I've run now, there's a number of reasons. One, I felt that Fianna Fáil was in danger of not winning a seat in this coming election. And I got that feedback from quite a number of Fianna Fáil people in the Roscommon Galway constituency over the summer when I was quietly inquiring about what was going to happen at the next election.
So did you approach the party to express an interest as opposed to the party approaching you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes, right.
And I want to make that clear that this initiative came from myself. One of the big things that I just could not understand was that a constituency like Roscommon Galway didn't have a government TD, a TD sitting on the government benches, and being the only constituency in the country that doesn't have a sitting government TD. And I think that leaves us at a grave political disadvantage. And there was a concern on my part that we would go through the next general election without having government representation. And I felt at this time was a time to offer myself. And that is in the context of a number of other things. I have 4 children in their 20s.
Right.
I meet their friends all the time. Housing is a generational crisis for that age group. They can't afford the rents. Even they can't save because the rents are so high.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they can save some money, they can't afford to buy a house or get a mortgage. And what I was noticing is that they're leaving this country. Now, we had, in my generation, left this country because there were no career opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
They're leaving this country not because they're not well qualified or that they don't have access to very good jobs, the best in our history, but they have no skin in the game. They can't root here.
Yeah.
And I think that that's extremely important, that we give them the opportunity and enable them to put roots down in this country. So they're leaving and they're saying, well, look, I might as well be in Sydney in Australia or Vancouver in Canada or in London if I can't have some ownership in this society.
And these are highly qualified people in a lot of cases, virtually all cases.
The best in our history.
Yeah.
The best in our history.
Yeah, we'll get on to the issues, Martin, in detail in a couple of minutes. Just to finish, I suppose, on this recent situation whereby you offered yourself as a prospective candidate for Fianna Fáil. And I suppose it was very much in the news that there was a convention held, a close convention, sitting Oireachtas member, Senator Eugene Murphy, former TD, current senator, had perhaps been seen as the front runner before your emergence. And the fallout from that convention, which you won, was that there was speculation that Senator Murphy might be added. He wasn't added. Can I ask you, did you expect him to be added as a running mate with you?
Well, I'm a first-time candidate. This was outside of my remit. I declared my interest on the 9th of December at a Corladal Cantor meeting. The delegate list is an old list.
Mm-hmm.
You must be 2 years on the list to have a vote.
Okay.
The only vote I had at that time was my own vote.
Okay.
And so I really did campaign to win that convention. I'll make no secret of that.
Yep.
But it was a personal campaign,
Yep.
which involved phone calls, text messaging, personal letters. And I found an appetite for change amongst the delegates. I won the convention. Now, I want to make this absolutely clear. I have canvassed for Senator Eugene Murphy at 2 general elections.
Okay.
I personally like Eugene. We get on well. But I felt that I was better positioned to win a seat for Fianna Fáil in the next general election. And the delegates at convention seemed to agree with that proposition.
Has it been a bruising experience? Do you feel any sympathy for Senator Murphy? And has the fallout been bruising for you? Or is it just business and politics?
Well, I think one of the things we all must take into account, and leaving politics aside, is the personal element, the human part of it. And so it must be very difficult to lose a convention when you are a politician for such a long time. And so I expressed that feeling to Senator Murphy after the convention. What happened after that was a matter for the constituency committee at headquarters.
Yeah.
They deliberated upon it and they made a decision. It was out of my hand. I had no input into that or influence over that decision. And that was a matter between Senator Eugene Murphy and the constituencies committee. And Senator Murphy decided to leave Fianna Fáil and run as an independent. And that is a matter for him.
Yeah. And just moving on to the campaign then, just again, before we get on to the issues, something I've noticed in the last week or so is, there's been a lot of clashes between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael candidates on the airwaves and so on. Some people will think that lacks credibility and that it's a sort of carry on that undermines the public's confidence in politicians. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael together for the last 5 years in coalition. And here they are a week or two after sitting at the cabinet table and so on together, squabbling. Is that, what's your view on that? Because a lot of people might think, that's not credible to see that.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to recognise we're 2 distinct political parties. I would have always thought that Fianna Fáil was left of centre, and that's where I sit in the political spectrum. I believe in the middle, I believe in the centre, and I believe centre parties need to cooperate. But centre parties also need to deliver for people, because if we don't deliver for people, we leave a vacuum at the extremes and allow other elements to come in. And we see that in other jurisdictions in Europe. In terms of the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael divide, look, an election happens, it's a contest of ideas. That's where the debate must happen. When the public decide who they want to be in the next government, or who they want to elect, I should say, then it's up to the parties to come together and negotiate a programme for government. And once you negotiate a programme for government, it's incumbent upon those parties to deliver that programme. So Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens delivered an agreed programme for government. and did so in a collegial manner. And that meant that it was a successful government in many aspects. But once an election is called, parties are entitled to put forward their ideas, produce their manifestos, and have a contest of ideas and allow the electorate to decide who's best placed to deliver those.
Okay, so let's get on to some of the issues, and there are many, I suppose. Some of the obvious ones, I suppose, you mentioned housing earlier, and I suppose everything is interlinked, you know, to some degree. I mean, what you mentioned about housing, Martin, young people struggling to get housing. Rents are high, housing is expensive, particularly in the urban areas. There's planning issues. I mean, on the one hand, I'll ask you what your policies are, but I'll also put it to you, I suppose, that the housing minister for the last 5 years has been a Fianna Fáil minister. So what, in any event, are your thoughts on what we need to do in that area?
Okay, just starting, firstly, the housing issue emerged quite some time ago, probably around 2016.
Right.
We had a lost decade after the crash.
Yeah.
We had a lack of investment in apprenticeships. Many of the current electricians, plumbers, carpenters exited the market. They either emigrated or they changed occupation. As I said, a lost decade. I do think that the era between 16 and 20 was a time where we lost impetus. I think the government from 2020 onwards has brought a renewed focus on housing. There were 20,000 houses built in 2020. We now have 52,000 new starts this year. There are going to be just under 40,000 houses delivered, predicted. We'll see how that turns out. So a renewed emphasis, a renewed focus. It takes time to turn this ship.
Yeah.
It's about capacity. So it's the capacity of having service lands available. It's also about having the professionals and the trades people to deliver.
That's a real issue, the lack of tradespeople, yeah.
A massive issue. And we're now caught in the situation that even if we wanted to build every house we wanted to, we've got to build that capacity. You know, we have increased, this government has increased the number of apprenticeships, and Fianna Fáil are committing to even accelerate that process because we need to do that. And apprenticeships in those trades need to be given status. These are very worthwhile, well-paid jobs. And I think too often in the past, trades were seen as some sort of a secondary avenue to employment rather than having equal status with people going to college. And I have a young nephew who went to college for a year, maybe, and he would agree with this, was shoehorned into a course he mightn't have wanted to do, has come out now and is on an electrician apprentice scheme, is absolutely delighted with life. He's in TUS on his 6 months release. And, you know, they're the type of people we want in the trade. So we have to build capacity. There has to be more lands available, service lands for developers. We also, and I think the last government placed huge importance on reforming the planning laws so that the last two bills passed were the Finance Bill and the Planning Act. And I think that showed the seriousness about this because we really do have to get the planning laws right to balance the public good versus sectoral interest. And the public good has to trump. And too often people have seen a situation where sectoral interests triumph the public good. The public good is we need to deliver housing, high quality housing. Yes, there has to be proper planning laws. We can't have a situation where we go back to the scandals like the pyrite scandal and that where there's substandard building practices or substandard materials. So again, Fianna Fáil is committing to a new building standards regulatory body in the next government if elected. And I think that's extremely important. And at the end of the day, people will say, well, developers, sometimes it's a bad word, but developers have to have a margin. Otherwise, they're not going to build those houses. Yeah. So there are a number of things. So it's a bit like turning a big ship. It takes time to turn it, but it would appear that there is an accelerated momentum to build this capacity. And I do think that the commitment to get to 300,000 houses in the next government, in the next 5 years, and I see all the parties are using the same figure, Fianna Fáil, Gael, and Sinn Féin. So I think that emphasis must be there. Who is best placed to deliver that? Well, I believe Fianna Fáil's plan is the best placed plan to do that.
Just on a micro level, but it's an important and emotive thing even for people in rural Ireland. There's great frustration that people can't build once-off housing on family land and so on. I mean, is there any prospect of that being addressed, or will that trend never be reversed, you know?
Yeah, I think that you still have to have planning laws and you still have to have infrastructure. But Fianna Fáil's view on that is there's social and economic need that we've got to view those once-off planning in a different way. We've got to be more empathetic to people who are building. You know, we really do have to enable this generation to build. Obviously, there have to be rules. You know, we can't go back to the 1970s where we had bungalow bliss and blighting the landscape of some of the most picturesque parts of Ireland. But we still need to be practical. We still need to allow people to build. And I think there has to be a different attitude. And that would appear to be different in different counties. There appear to be planners in different counties who take different views on this.
Yeah. And I mean, we have to, well, there's a lot of good things happening. The general trend, arguably, in the last 30 years is that rural Ireland, I know it's a huge generalisation, but has been declining on one level because we see closures of shops, post offices, bank branches, pubs, and we see issues with rural transport and so on. And we see, I suppose, our young people emigrating and so forth. And, you know, I'm just thinking about the once-off housing and so on. I mean, how do we address this perceived decline in rural Ireland? How do we make sure that young people maybe stay in rural Ireland and maybe get involved in farming or get involved in industry and so on?
Well, there are a number of challenges in rural Ireland and in terms of retaining our young people in. And part of it, the digitalisation has been the closure of service industries like banks in smaller towns and that. We need to invert that. And the production of adequate broadband into rural areas is a huge part of that. But also to getting people to live in the small towns again, because one of the things I've noticed on the canvas, and I was already aware of it, but is how many of our main streets have become quite derelict. And yet we have all these beautiful estates on the sides of towns. I was in Ballahadreen yesterday, some lovely estates in Ballahadreen, Ballinasloe the same way, Ballinlough. The urban, the vacant and derelict grant for housing is a huge plus for some people. I was in Ballinlough the other night, met a couple there who have refurbished a vacant derelict house. They got €70,000 of grant funding to do that. There was also an SEAI grant as well to insulate that home. Now that's significant funding, and it's a beautiful house. They've produced a wonderful home for themselves. But I would like to see a huge emphasis on that, building up our small town centres again. And I think there's huge scope to do that. You know, you don't require planning for that. They're in towns, and there's lots of scope to do that. And I think we need to push that along in a big way. The big difficulty is if we start to lose more services in our rural areas, we lose our post office, we lose our secondary school, we lose our national school. Once that infrastructure is eroded, then our small towns and villages become less attractive places for people to live. And we need to maintain that. And the other big issue is the farming issue. The family farms. Now, in the west of Ireland, traditionally it was suckler farmers, and it is a particular way of life. It has been undermined in recent years. And I think that if we lose the farming community network, then the backbone of rural Ireland is going to be lost completely. And we've got to support that. Now, I know Fianna Fáil now are proposing increasing the suckler cow grant to €350, the O grant to €35 a head. But we have to look at other ways to support. So the acre scheme is another way of supporting rural farming, environmental farming, and that. But I would be a big proponent of that. I think our farmers are world-class food producers. We need to recognise that. We need to also recognise that many farmers have engaged in environmental farming. It's the acre scheme, which has replaced the GLAS and REP schemes, is oversubscribed. Farmers have taken up those grants and have committed to those schemes. So we've got to support the farming community. And we are different in the west of Ireland in that respect.
It's difficult, though, to get young people involved in farming, isn't it?
Well, that's the other challenge, and I'm glad you brought that up, is that we need in the next CAP reform talks, talk about a retirement scheme, an adequate farmer retirement scheme, because what I'm noticing as a GP in my surgery, I'm not an expert on farming, obviously, but what I'm noticing in my is an aging demographic of older farmers, many single farmers getting older. It's quite time intensive and work intensive suckler herd farming, and they're looking for a way of exiting, but there's no seamless way for them to do that, and we need to plan for that.
Right.
And in order to plan for that, we need to support young farmers coming in. So proper succession schemes to allow young farmers come in and support them in that area. See, it's not just a farming industry issue. It's an actual societal issue for the west of Ireland.
Yeah. And just moving on to another topic, Martin, that has been very much in the news for some time, immigration. And I suppose locally in Athlone and Roscommon a couple of years ago, and most notably in Ballydreen, I suppose, on an ongoing basis, it's kind of a powder keg almost, a simmering there. So we had, as I said, incidents or events in local towns and villages, and there's a concern that, as I said, it could be a powder keg that could almost lead to social disorder and so on. I mean, the consensus now seems to be that this has been handled really badly over the last few years. What's your thoughts on immigration, how we should deal with it?
I'm going to start again by reminding you that I am the son of an immigrant.
Right.
And my mother was Indian. She came to this country and made a very good life, and she contributed to society here.
Yeah.
And we must be careful to make a distinction between people we invite in here and who are legal immigrants, but has run our services and grow our economy, and they've been very, very successful in doing so. I mean, without them, our hospitality industry, our health care industry would collapse in the morning.
Yeah.
The people who are seeking international protection, I think we have international obligations. It's not just an Irish problem.
Yeah.
But we need to mature quickly. We were a country of emigration, and we are now a country of immigration. And we need a mature, robust, fair immigration policy. We need people to see that it works, because if we haven't
had that in the last 5 years.
No, people have lost confidence because they feel it isn't timely, it isn't efficient, and so we need to do a number of things. Some things have already happened.
Right.
We extended the safe country list, and that means that countries where people aren't under imminent threat for political, religious, or whatever reasons, if they arrive to this country, they should be processed quickly and deported if they're not entitled to be here. And I think in doing that in the last 2 years, we've reduced the number of applicants from those countries by 67%, which is very significant.
Right.
For people who have the right to international protection, and it has been established by our immigration authorities here, they should be processed in a timely, efficient manner and be allowed to work as soon as they're able to. Because I think one of the bugbears for people, talking to people yesterday, for example, on the campus in Ballydreen, was, is this misconception of people, they're here to take benefits, they're here for free housing, they're competing with us for our health services and our education services, they don't want to work.
And putting pressure on our social welfare system.
Absolutely, but they should be allowed to work.
Right.
But you need an efficient system. So what Fianna Fáil are proposing in the next government, if elected, is that the Department of Justice and Department of Children, who've been handling immigration and the housing of immigrants, that will be taken away, and a new Department of Domestic Affairs will be created, which will integrate all of these services. So things like border security, internal, external security, and integration will be under one roof, with joined up thinking, a more sophisticated approach. For example, if we were to take 1,000 Irish men and put them into a hostel in the middle of English countryside or into the French countryside, there would be problems. Yeah. And people have a right to be concerned. We've got to be a bit more sophisticated in that. Why can't we have mixed groups of people living together, families and men? It doesn't take huge imagination to work that out. So we need to have better consultation. We need to have better communication with communities. And the other thing we need to do is communities who have taken in quite large numbers of international protection people, they need to be supported. And Fianna Fáil are also proposing in the manifesto that there would be community funding focused and targeted to those communities that take in international protection seekers, that fund would be spent in that local community.
Yeah.
But, people in Ballydreen have a point. Their Garda station was closed down. They didn't have a Garda present for a town of 2,800 people not to have a regular Garda presence is simply not acceptable.
And it has to be putting pressure on schools and
is.
probably GP services as well and so forth. And also, at different points in the country, you know, this trend of using hotels is all obviously impacting on the local tourism industry. And I mean, oughtn't that approach be looked at? Like, why are hotels and private developers the first stop off for the accommodation?
I agree with you 100%. And I made this point yesterday when we were on the canvas that the practice of using privately supplied accommodation either to nursing homes, and you know, at the beginning of this process, some nursing homes were closed in order to take in international protection seekers, which to me seemed ridiculous, and also hotels undermining the local economy, and especially in tourism, but also just the local economy and employment. So Fianna Fáil have committed in the next government, if elected, not to take on any more private accommodation, that the state must develop its own capacity. And I think that's absolutely critical again, because if people are in communities and they see their local hotel closing, their local nursing home closing, you know, you can understand how they could feel aggrieved by this. And then it creates a point of friction between the international protection, people who are seeking international protection, and the local community, which shouldn't be there.
Yeah. Martin, just on moving on to health, and obviously this is an area of particular interest to you with your career as a GP. If I could put it to you, I suppose that, again, accepting that there are good things happening and so forth, there's also a number of ongoing issues in terms of waiting lists and in terms of hospitals being under pressure, bed shortages, and just on the waiting lists, I mean, almost 4,000 children waiting for first-time appointments for mental health services. And, you know, in a wealthy society, and this is an ongoing issue for years, why is this the case? Why? And you must see that as a GP, you know, and that must frustrate you, that people are waiting to see mental health experts and waiting to get into hospitals and waiting for appointments and so on. How do we address this?
Well, you brought up the CAM service. One of the pillars of my programme would be my interest in mental health and the CAM service. And one of the big frustrations as a GP has been the inability to get timely assessments or any assessment for a child, especially children who have autism or ADHD. I do think that we have to build that capacity. We may need to be more sophisticated. I would feel that we may need to have a separate ADHD autism assessment referral process, because what we're getting is up to 50% of my referrals as a GP being bounced back to me, but with no clear clinical pathway of how to get an assessment or a service for those children. And it is hugely frustrating. Many parents are forced into the private sector and paying quite big fees.
Why hasn't it been addressed heretofore by the outgoing government?
No, I do think there's been a greater awareness around the whole autism and ADHD diagnosis, and I think that has come. And we're also seeing as well, and I will call it a tsunami of anxiety and depressive illness coming from younger people, and personally and professionally, I would see that as a part of a response to social media. Social media is going to be, and it's affecting our young people, is going to be one of the next big health scandals. It's going to be like the cigarette industry. We're going to see, and we're seeing it in the United States already. The US Surgeon General has called out social media companies for creating addictive algorithms which entice young people in and keep them locked into that rabbit hole of social media. So it's almost easier for a young person, if they put the word suicide in to a social media platform, to be brought down the rabbit hole of how to commit suicide, or to take their own life, I should say, rather than directing down a pathway of where they can seek help and advice and assessment. So we're coming back. We have to build capacity there. I feel extremely strongly about it. I'm a first-time candidate coming into this. I'll be advocating strongly for enhanced CAM services. I think parents deserve that. Our children deserve that. And there's a lot of suffering there because of the inability to access adequate services in a timely manner.
Are you also noticing post-COVID any shift in the numbers of people who are suffering from loneliness or depression or mental health issues of all age groups?
Yeah, I think COVID had a big effect on mental health on all age groups. our younger people, anxiety, less resilient, fearful. Our older people, huge loneliness, some of them not socially engaging after the lockdowns, again, having to be enticed out of their own homes. As a GP, we saw that up very close. It was a really challenging time.
Yeah.
And I don't think at the time we fully understood the effect of lockdowns on people's mental health.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that now. So yes, it was a big factor.
It's interesting that you say young people are less resilient, and other people have made that observation. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I have 4 children in their 20s, and they're absolutely excellent, and their friends and their generation. They're well trained. They are confident in many ways. They can go to almost any part of the world and engage and survive. But for some reason, they doubt themselves. It's an anxiety thing, and I'm not sure if social media has played into that. Expectations that are laid upon them, expectations they lay upon themselves, and the non-acceptance.
And then it's as if they don't have the coping skills then afterwards.
That's right. That's exactly it. So we do need to address that.
Yeah.
And I do think that the root of this is the access to social media for our younger children. And I would have very strong views on that. I think we probably shouldn't, and this is a personal view now, that children under the age of 12 should not have access to social media unless it is protected by their parents. And I think that is something that is going to be addressed. If it's not addressed by government, it's going to be addressed by class action suits in the United States, and we're going to see more and more of that happening.
So does it follow, would you feel that mobile phones and so on should be effectively banned from schools?
Yes. Right. I mean, it's that radical.
Yeah.
This is the new health scandal of this generation. It's the smoking scandal. The industry knows exactly what it's doing.
But we don't seem to be making any progress with putting pressure on the industry, do we?
Well, I think the regulatory authorities in the European Union, and based in Dublin, have started to make inroads into that and are starting to pick up on that and pursue the social media companies. But I think it's going to have to be much more rigorous.
And obviously there's a parental, accepting that parents are under their own pressures with cost of living and with busy lives, but there is a parental responsibility here too, isn't there?
But parents need to be supported, in fairness. If you have a whole society moving one way and single parents are trying to hold back that wave, they also need to be supported, and they need to be supported with legislation.
Just on hospitals, and I know and the pressure on beds and so on. I know it's 12 or 13 years now since Roscommon A&E closed, but you were a GP in the region at the time. I'm just wondering, where are you on that argument about, emergency, it being okay to close emergency services in Roscommon and go for the centralisation of services argument? Now, I know there was issues at HICWA and so on, and standards in Roscommon Hospital. They could arguably have been addressed in the short term. But on the kind of approach of, let's move everything to Galway and so forth, or Castlebar or whatever, and close down emergency services in Roscommon, was that short-sighted? Because we see the pressures in Ballinasloe and Galway in terms of A&E and even in terms of parking and congestion and so on. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Because I know Roscommon Hospital is quite busy at the moment on other levels, but clearly the emergency services are gone. And what's your view on that?
Well, my view on the health services essentially is capacity.
Right.
Our population has grown by 1.2 million in the last 20 years. We haven't developed a new adult hospital since Tala and Beaumont in the 90s. There was this misconception about the black hole of health budgets. But every time we've put investment into certain areas of health, like the cardiovascular strategy, like the cancer strategy, we've gotten results. And a lot of good things have happened. But we do need to build capacity. Now, one of the measures to do that is to have these elective units. These are hospitals that do planned procedures, so like total hip replacements, total knee replacements, cataracts, so planned surgeries. And one of them is being developed in Merlin Park Hospital at the moment. That will mean that the person who's going in for their total hip replacement or their knee replacement won't be competing with the person who's acutely ill in an emergency room in UHG. And so that's one of the big issues. Coming back to Roscommon Hospital and dealing with it head on, one of the big challenges, and I see this as a doctor, is attracting adequately qualified doctors and allied health professionals into rural areas. And Roscommon is a rural area. So if you're going to have an all singing, all dancing hospital, you need to be sure that you're going to have that personnel there to provide a safe, high quality service. So I would say is that the reconfiguration of Roscommon Hospital in terms of what it is doing now has been very successful, but it should be built on.
Right.
So I've spoken to members of the medical staff and management there, and yes, there are plans for the 50-bed rehab unit and also for a new psychiatric block there. But there are things that we should do now that could be done quickly to improve the patient experience there. So we have a very successful endoscopy unit there. People from all over the region coming there for their SCOSA, their tummies, and for their bowel. And we should build on that. There is a same-day cystoscopy service that's a screening for bladder cancers and also an ENT service. But they need a new decontamination unit in order to improve the throughput of patients. There's a simple project that wouldn't cost an arm and a leg. The outpatients department was built in 1941. We have elderly patients going there to stroke clinics, frailty clinics, memory clinics. There's a ramp that I found it hard to get up. There's no disabled toilet facilities. Whilst the interior of the building is kept as well as it might be, it is not adequate for modern day medical practice. And in addition to that, Roscommon Hospital want to attract subspecialties like neurology, dermatology, rheumatologists down to Roscommon to make it more accessible to this community. There are many things we can do in the short term to improve the patient journey. Many patients are choosing Roscommon University Hospital for their services. They ask me as a GP to refer them there, especially to the medical assessment unit. It's a very nice culture. It's high quality assessment, and they're very happy with it. And they're often willing to wait for a day or two before attending another hospital just to go to Roscommon Hospital. But there are a number of things we can do. I've spoken to medical personnel in the hospital and to management. The outpatients department, for example, is not fit for purpose. It barely serves the medical services that are being produced there now. There's a ramp there that I found difficult to get up, and we're expecting elderly people, frail people going to stroke clinics, frailty clinics, and memory clinics to negotiate that ramp. There isn't any disabled toilet facilities in the outpatients unit. It was built in 1941. So that could be redeveloped. And what medical personnel are really anxious about is to attract visiting consultants from University College Hospital Galway, such as neurologists, rheumatologists, dermatologists, who would like to come and provide service because there's a pressure on accommodation there. And it would be more accessible to people in this community. In addition to that, car parking facilities.
Big issue,
Elderly people are having to park their cars down at Hyde Park and walk up to the hospital. Again, there's ample space behind the hospital to develop a car park, and it's something that has to be done and could be done in the short term. And I have discussed this with Micheál Martin, and he has agreed that these are things that we should be looking at in the short to medium term and try to achieve. Also, the urgent care clinic or the injury clinic has become a success story. Yes, there are limitations in terms of the time and the scope of practice there, but from a point where there was only 5 to 6 people going through the unit, the advanced nurse practitioner model, working to protocol, there are now 50 to 60 people a day being seen in that unit. And people are choosing to travel from County Mayo and parts of County Galway to come there because they can be seen for minor injuries quickly. So these are things that we can do.
I wonder, is there enough awareness of that? Because I know a few years ago there was a bit of a perception, well, the hospital has been downgraded and so forth. So I wonder if the wider public are aware of the services that are there for children and so forth.
Yeah, I think that's very important that it is promoted. But, and people sometimes say, well, it's limited to 8 to 8. Well, if you had more advanced nurse practitioners, there may be a possibility of increasing that scope. But also, too, they take the pressure off other emergency rooms such as Portiuncula and Castlebar and UHG and provide appropriate care in an appropriate setting. So we should build on the successes there. Now, there's another issue there as well. The hospital is older, and in the longer term, the hospital accommodation for inpatients should be looked at. And it is something I would advocate if I was elected as a TD for this area, because the medical assessment unit has been a success. It's very well run. Patients are hugely satisfied with it. And in fact, one of the things that I asked management and the medical professions in the hospital, when they do satisfaction surveys, the two big issues are car parking and the outpatients clinic.
Right, okay. You mentioned Portiuncula, just briefly. I mean, that is anecdotally such a frustration for people, and appreciating the staff are doing their best and the staff are under pressure. But people are spending hours there in waiting in A&E and so forth. Is there any prospect of that being addressed?
Yeah. The emergency room to me is always like the canary in the coal mine. The emergency room isn't the problem. The problem is capacity in the hospital. So when we have a situation that the only way we can access services in the hospital is through the emergency room, then we get the congestion there. So we really have to find other referred pathways into the hospital. And the reason for that is the capacity, the physical capacity isn't there. Now, there is a new emergency room planned and being delivered by 2027, and that's a very welcome investment in Portiuncula University Hospital. But again, we have to build capacity. And I've spoken to management there, and whilst they're very, very happy with the new 50-bedded block at the back of the hospital, they recognise that the standard of accommodation in the old block is not fit for purpose for modern practice. And that has to be looked for. Look, if we've a wealthy country, a growing economy, and a growing population, we have to develop public services that people can avail of. Then people don't mind paying taxes. But if they're paying tax and their public services aren't adequate, they have a real gripe with the system, and I have to agree with that. And that I'm coming in from the outside in this. First time. These are things I'll be shouting about.
Okay. Just a couple of final questions, Martin. Rural crime has been an issue in the last number of years, but particularly the last few months, including, if I may say, in your own area, we've seen a lot of instances of break-ins and so forth. And the public are concerned about that. What can be done on that front?
Well, again, I would say that coming from a rural area, dealing with elderly people who live in remote areas and are very vulnerable, and we see that on the canvas even going out after dark at the moment, how vulnerable these communities are. So a number of things. I've spoken to the Gardaí in relation to this and to the GRA and to communities. We need to beef up the numbers of Gardaí. We took civilians in the Gardaí to do administrative duties. It was a good idea. It was supposed to free up Gardaí to the front line. It hasn't happened. And one of those reasons are the civilian members of the Gardaí in administration aren't enabled or empowered to sign off on certain documents. So there's a lot of duplication of process.
Right.
We don't have enough Gardaí. We've just 14,000 Gardaí at the moment. Fianna Fáil is committed to increase the numbers of Gardaí to 20,000 in the term of the next government. And that's a net increase of 5,000 members. That may mean looking at the packages we offer Gardaí to attract and retain them in an economy where there is full employment. We also need shorter term measures, and there are shorter term measures. There are only about 4 to 5 bridges into Roscommon, Ballinasloe, across the Shannon. And these are where these organised crime groups are coming from. We need enhanced and beefed up patrols on those roads. We need to use technology as well.
Surely that should have happened in the last few months, because it happened years ago, Operation Shannon, I think.
Yes.
And it was very successful at the time.
Yes, and there's an Operation Rottweiler in Tipperary that has been piloted again, where they had similar problems. And that I'm calling for that to happen, and it should have happened.
Okay.
And I think people need to have confidence. The state owes people security. That's its primary objective of the state. People need to be safe and not live in fear. Yeah. And finally, we should beef up the reserve Garda force. It has dropped to 350. That should be beefed up to about 3,000 members. We need local intelligence as well as national intelligence. And I think it would be hugely important to build up that network. We've lost the concept of community policing, and we really need to get back to that.
Yeah, well, it's a moot point as well that people may not be attracted to the Gardaí as much now as in the past. When we see some of the treatment that Gardaí have had to put up with the Dublin riots and other instances that are highlighted on social media, that's probably a discussion for another day. Can I just ask you, before I get on to a couple of final political questions, just finally on issues, drugs in our society and in rural Ireland, cocaine and other drugs seems to be a huge issue. You must know that from your in a professional capacity. How concerned are you about that?
I'm extremely concerned, and this isn't something that's happened today or yesterday. The prevalence of cocaine in our society is remarkable. It has infiltrated every aspect and every part of our society, even in rural areas. So we have cocaine dealing on air code. We have cocaine dealing at crossroads in rural areas. I mean, it's almost unimaginable, and the fallout is quite significant. So I have parents coming to my surgery saying that these are law-abiding people who've worked hard all their lives, and their first contact with the criminal fraternity is because their son or daughter has become involved in taking cocaine and a cocaine addiction. So gangs calling to their home and saying, we want a payment now for John or Sean, and it's 3,000 euros, 2,000. These are the figures that are being told to me. We'll be back next week and we'll be breaking windows.
This must be putting incredible strain on families.
Unbelievable strain. Yeah. People going to credit unions, people going and borrowing money from relatives in order to pay off these deals. Young people getting ensnared in a situation where they're losing their jobs, ending up in addiction centres and effectively destroying their lives. So we really need to take a no-holds-barred, no-tolerance approach to drug dealing. And I don't think we have done that robustly enough. We need to do that. We also have to take a better approach to young people who are ensnared in drug addiction. We need to look at the medical model and try and rehabilitate them rather than criminalise them.
Okay. Martin, just before we wrap up, the election then, which is coming up on the 29th, are you confident of being elected?
I'll only be confident when those boxes are open on the Saturday morning. And that's not because I don't believe people who are telling me they're going to support me, but because I have a mantra, and I don't assume anything, don't presume on anything. And I have another tenet, which is work really hard at what you're doing, and then the results may follow. But I would hope to be competitive, being honest. I came in to win a seat. I would be very disappointed if I don't win a seat, but I am realistic. I am a first-time candidate, and I'll be fighting for the third seat in this constituency.
And if, as expected, Fianna Fáil are involved in the next government, have you been promised any role in government?
Absolutely not. I didn't come into this election looking for anything. People say that might be quite naive. I felt very strongly, and I explained to you early on in the interview, why I chose to run. This constituency of Roscommon Galway needs government representation. We're the only constituency in the country without government representation. I want to get elected first before I think about anything else beyond that. If I was asked to serve, of course, I would take that request very seriously. But I expect nothing from anyone. I expect to be judged on my results. So the election is my absolute priority.
But you must be greatly tempted by the fact that a ministry of whatever nature would give you much more influence than as a TD.
Well, absolutely.
Particularly given your interest in health and so many other issues.
Absolutely. I think if you go into politics, you want to go in and get to a point where you can affect change. And obviously, if you're a minister in government, you have the power to affect change, much more so than as a backbench TD. But I have made no demands on anyone. I'm here to try and get elected. I'm fighting for that third seat. And if I get elected, then that process might begin.
And in the event of you not getting elected, will you run for the Seanad?
I haven't given that any thought.
Okay, you're concentrating on getting elected.
I'm concentrating on getting elected.
And finally, I was going to ask you just, Martin, to finish how you relax. And I know you've been the team doctor with Roscommon GA for many, many years. Obviously, that's a big part of your downtime. You must love that, do you?
Yeah, it's work mixed with pleasure.
Of course.
And but 28 years, right. I was received a phone call from the county secretary, Sean Mullaney, 1996, and I remember asking my dad at the time, he was GP, and he'd been involved with Galway previously. He said, "Take it with two hands, you'll enjoy it." 28 years later, I'm at it. It's a bit like The Godfather 3. It's harder to get out of it than it is to stay in it. I don't know what my commitments will be in terms of after the election, but I have hugely enjoyed it. I've met generations of players, of county board officials, and just general supporters, and it's been one of the greatest pleasures of my life, and one of the best decisions I ever made was to become involved with Roscommon County.
And Roscommon G is in a good place at the moment.
Absolutely.
Particularly with some recent off-the-field
with the new investment now in the Centre of Excellence, which is long overdue. We really need that as a county to give the best facilities we can to our young people both young men and young women to achieve their potential within Gaelic games, because we can see it in other sports where facilities are enhanced. And thankfully, we are seeing right throughout the country a great investment in our sporting facilities.
Yeah, and it's so important apart from sport, from a mental health point of view as well.
Yes.
So it's all positive. Martin, I'm conscious you're a busy man and you have commitments today, so I want to thank you for taking part in this podcast. We wish you the very best of luck in the forthcoming election. Thank you, Martin Daly. Thank you.